So good afternoon and welcome to the How to Succeed in the Block Q&A session for 2022. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of Australia and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. We extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. My name is May and I am the Dictum President for 2022. As of 2023, I will be a fourth year law student. Being part of Dictum, I have been able to meet amazing, inspiring people in law, such as Bill, Kathleen, Shireen, and Taylor. I have loved every minute of being involved in the Dictum family as it has allowed me to be a voice and a face for all VU law students and staff. It has provided me with pathways to offer VU students great networking opportunities and events, and the chances to get to know what their options are while at uni and after uni. Just a few quick reminders for Dictum that our VU Law Ball is coming up, so make sure to purchase your tickets before they sell out. And nominations for our 2023 committee is open. So check out updates via Dictum's social media pages for more information, or visit our website at www.dictumsocietyvu.com. But enough about me, as I will now go through some housekeeping rules. So you are free to have your cameras on or off, but we would much prefer that you have it on. Please ensure that you remain on mute, and should you have any questions, please use the raise hand function in your Zoom options, or feel free to type it in the chat box throughout the session. This session will run for 1 hour and 30 minutes until 7 p.m. the latest. At the end of the session, we will take a group photo. So if you would like to be a part of it, then you will need to ensure your camera is turned on. Introductions. So what is this session about and how will it benefit students? This session was designed to provide all law and justice students the opportunity to ask any questions they may have regarding tips to succeed in the block, or have any questions they may need assistance with. The benefits of this session is we get to hear from our very own academics outside of class time, and we can freely discuss topics with them. So in saying that, this is your chance, so bring as many questions as possible to the table. Introducing our speakers. Firstly, Dr. Bill Swaney is a senior lecturer in the College of Law and Justice at Victoria University, Melbourne. Bill is an established researcher and author, particularly in the areas of free speech, human rights, law, equal opportunity law, media law. He recently completed a PhD examining Australia's racial vilification laws. Bill is admitted as an Australian lawyer in the Supreme Court of Australia, in Victoria, and prior to commencing teaching in 2003, he was the principal lawyer at the Busy Community Legal Centre. Welcome, Dr. Bill, and thank you so much for being here today. Bill has been a massive support for Dictum, and today's session was actually his idea. So I will now pass it over to you, Bill, and if you can also please tell us more about yourself and your journey in law.
Okay, thanks, mate. Thanks for that really kind introduction. And I guess about myself, I've been teaching at Victoria University for about 9 years. And I am the first in my family to go to university. In fact, there are no other lawyers in my family. So in terms of my study, I basically, and in terms of my career, like I virtually had to rely on my own resources in terms of getting through the study and networking, finding job opportunities and things like that. The other interesting part of it is that it actually took me 8 years to complete my undergraduate study. So I did an arts degree and I did a law degree, and I took some time off. In fact, during the final year, I decided to take 18 months off, and I came back and completed the last 6 months over 18 months. And I actually really think that was one of the best choices I ever made, to actually take a break from study, because I wasn't sure about whether I wanted to complete the degree, whether I wanted to work in the legal profession, and if I did want to work in the legal profession, where did I want to work? And it was really actually useful taking that time off. And I'll come back to that topic a bit later. In terms of what I do, my area is human rights law. and I teach in that area. I also research in that area, and there are lots of career opportunities in human rights law. As I say to my students in the human rights law class, Victoria is a good place in terms of work in the human rights area because Victoria has its own Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities. So there are lots of work opportunities, whether you're working for government or whether you're working for a community legal centre or whether you're working in a policy role. There are lots of um, career opportunities and volunteering opportunities in the human rights area. Um, I just want to say a little about how I help students with career goals and career progression. I always encourage students to start volunteering as early as possible. I started volunteering at Fitzroy Legal Service when I was doing my PLT, but of course you can start volunteering much earlier than that. Most CLCs accept students pre-graduation and certainly pre-admission, and it's a really good idea to start volunteering during your degree. It means you get experience, you get confidence, you get great networking opportunities. And in terms of how I can assist students, if you're interested in human rights careers, then please contact me and I can give you more advice based on the particular areas that you're interested in working in or interested in volunteering in. But thanks, I'll hand it back to you, Mae.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Bill. So I'll introduce our second speaker, which is Kathleen Raponi. Kathleen is a senior law lecturer in the first year college at Victoria University. Her previous experience as a legal practitioner informs her approach to teaching. She is passionate about creating unique and experiential learning experiences for students. Kathleen specialises in teaching first year law units in Block Note, and she has received the Vice Chancellor Citation Award for Excellence in Learning and Teaching and 2 first-year college awards recognising her innovative design and implementation of first-year law field trips. Welcome, Kathleen, and thank you so much for being here today too. Before I pass it over to you, I just wanted to say that I was and am inspired by your journey. When we were doing the recording for the VU City Tower opening, we had to do a classroom setting where you shared your experiences from being a law student to becoming a VU lecturer and your resume journey. It has stuck with me since, and I hope you can share your story with our participants today too. So I will now pass it over to you, Kathleen, to tell us more about yourself and your journey in law.
Thank you, Mae. That was very kind. And thank you for having me today. And I can see some familiar faces from class, so really great to see you all as well. Like Bill, I was the first in my family to go to university. Both my parents completed school up to like year 10, year 11. So I was the first to complete year 12. And when I was studying in year 12, all I knew is I wanted to get a good entry score. When I was younger, I had some aspirations about becoming a lawyer, but wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, and then got the good enter score and then went, yeah, I'll apply for law. Yeah, got into law, and it just sort of all flew from there. And so whilst I was studying, I also was participating in some voluntary opportunities at community legal centres. So I worked at also the Fitzroy Legal Service, Wyndham Legal Service, Communications Law Centre, and also at some law firms part-time. So that was really insightful just to even make connections between what I was learning at university, the theory, and then seeing the practical aspects. And there were things that when I was doing that experience, I felt like I wasn't learning at university because it was a practical skill. And so that's where some of my passion for unit design comes from, because I want to expose students to those practical aspects before being at the foot of the door in an employment situation. So I did that. So I was a high school leaver, did my law degree, and then I heard about that you could do your dissertation while studying in your undergraduate degree and graduate with honours. So I thought, great, I'm going to go for that. So I graduated with honours. So if you haven't heard about that, basically what it means is if you maintain a certain average in all your units, in your final year, you can do your dissertation and graduate with honours without adding any extra time onto your course. So that's a really great opportunity. So I did that. And then I was the first year to graduate when they changed everything from articles to traineeships. So I was learning about that there was this thing called Leo Cousins that was emerging, and you could do that, or you could do a supervised legal traineeship. And so I had aspirations to do a supervised traineeship, which basically meant you would be employed by a legal practice and they'd pay for your training. So I decided that's what I wanted. So when I was in my final year, I went to one of the VU career expos and I was feeling all motivated after going. So on the way home, I stopped at this strip of, well, it was a main road where there was about 3 or 4 different law firms. And I decided that I was going to physically hand in my resume there. So the first one that I went into, handed in my resume to the secretary. She goes, "Oh, just wait a minute." She came back and she goes, "Oh, wait a minute, he'll speak to you." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So he came out and he goes, "Let's grab a coffee." So he grabbed a coffee and he said, "I've got an idea. Why don't you come in 1 day a week, see if you like it here, and we'll see how you fit in." And that's what I did. And then I ended up doing my supervised traineeship with them. And it was just sort of luck of the draw in terms of they've just lost their family law lawyer. At that point, I didn't want to be a family law lawyer, but I did do a bit of that, and it was a general firm, so I was exposed to a lot of different areas of law as well. So I was quite lucky, that opportunity, but I think what they really liked about me was that I didn't just send an email with my resume, that I was physically there, and it was something that they continued to remind me of when I'd been there for a long time. So that was part of my journey into the law. I feel like I've been talking a lot, so I might just add that in terms of what I do now, I work in the first year college, teaching first year units, mainly foundational ones and building legal skills. And I'm going to be offering you a lot of tips today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. I will now introduce our third speaker, Shireen. Shireen is a senior lawyer at FCG Legal and is a Law Institute of Victoria accredited specialist lawyer in immigration law. She is a barrister and solicitor of the Supreme Court of Victoria and High Court of Australia. Shireen has numerous years of experience in resolving complex migration matters, from decisions of the Department of Home Affairs, Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and the courts. She frequently advises lawyers and migrant agents practicing in migration law. She is the co-author of the Australian Immigration Companion and the Australian Migration Legislation Collection, and she is also a member of the Accredited Specialisation Board of the Law Institute of Victoria and an advisory committee member of immigration law. Welcome, Shireen, and thank you so much for being here today as well. We are absolutely in awe and thankful to have one of our very own migration law academics join us. And it has been an honour to have our migration law students be more included in Dictum this year. And I personally have loved meeting our migration law members too. So I will now pass it over to you, Shireen, to tell us more about yourself and your journey in law.
Thank you, May, and thank you to you and your team for including our migration students. I've only heard great feedback and they now really feel part of the College of Law and the society, so thank you to your team. Just a quick overview of how I got to where I am now, and thank you for the introduction. So I completed my law studies. I will be honest, I didn't know if I wanted to even do law or study law. So I'm going to show my age. I did my articles, not my traineeship, and the opportunity to do my traineeship was really last minute, and I was really thankful I had that opportunity to do it. It was in an area, I won't mention it, but it was in an area I really didn't like because now that I reflect on it, I couldn't see the outcomes of my work. So I was just one component of a large project and I couldn't see outcomes. And After that articles year, I really felt like law wasn't for me, and I was nearly about to quit the law. And I think that's one of the tips I want to talk about later. Don't let one experience cloud your judgment about the law. So what I did is I actually went back to VU, because VU were offering a graduate certificate at that time in migration law. And I'd heard about migration law. I hadn't been exposed to it that much, but having spoken to someone who practiced in it, I thought, great, this is something I'd like to see, because I can see outcomes. So I worked and I studied the graduate certificate, and then I decided, yep, I love migration. And since then, migration has been my whole life. I got a job at a law firm, FCG Legal, after that, and I've been there for nearly 15 years. And I think it's rare to have someone who stays in one law firm for that long. The reason I love it is the work that we do. And I think I'm very lucky I found a firm that I've stayed for so long. And I guess that's another tip that I wanted to tell graduates. You don't have to follow that myth of changing law firms all the time. That's not a requirement. And so I've been there for quite a while, and then the opportunity came along to teach in the migration units at VU, and I absolutely love it. So I sort of share my time between practical work at FCG Legal and teaching. A few years later on, I decided I wanted to specialise in immigration. So I undertook my specialisation exams with the Law Institute of Victoria. They were probably the most difficult exams I have ever sat, but it helps in getting some recognition that you specialise in that area. So since then, again, as I said, I've been sharing my time between teaching and working in the area, and I guess that leads me to my final point. How can I help students? If I find students that really enjoy this area of law, I do encourage them to contact me, because I want to help give them perspective of the practical side and what they can expect in the migration industry. There is a lot of work in the migration industry, and I think some students get a bit concerned about recent deregulation in this area, and there's not enough work. This area is screaming out for lawyers in this area, particularly in the legal arena and the more complex areas. So I can assist students if they want any more information about the migration area and any opportunities. So I think Dr. Bill mentioned about getting those opportunities, and I think being in the field, you become aware about these opportunities, and it's always good to put forward some VU students who would fit those opportunities. So that's enough about me, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Shereen. Thank you for that. So I will now introduce our fourth speaker, Taylor. Taylor is a lecturer in criminology in College of Law and Justice at Victoria University with 7 years of teaching experience. Taylor is responsible for chairing masters and undergraduate units and developing a range of block model subjects that include corporate crime, research methods, and crimes across borders. She also supervises higher degree research law and criminology students. Welcome, Taylor, and a massive thank you to you too for being here also. As per migration, we are absolutely in awe and thankful to have one of our very own law of criminology academics join us today too. And just by having our criminology students and staff included, it has been a fantastic journey so far. I personally have also loved meeting our criminology members. And by the way, Taylor, I recall that at the VU Open Day a few months ago, I had the privilege of listening to you share your knowledge and experiences with potential students, and I was absolutely inspired. I even started to consider taking up criminology too. But I will now pass it over to you, Taylor, to tell us more about yourself and your journey in law.
May, we will always welcome you to the field of criminology. So if you ever change your mind, I know this amazing lady, Pam Christo, who is always glad to convert people to criminology. If you know, you know. I'm sure everyone in here has met Pam and her amazing fonts. If you see this, Pam, I mean every word of it. But it is so great to be here and for criminology to be a part of this amazing space that you've created. The way it's student-led, I'm really proud to always do any event with you, and it's always a pleasure to meet you and see you again. In terms of my journey, it's probably a little bit different in terms of lacking that practical element. I generally call it quite a nerdy progression into where I am now. It really started mainly with my love and obsession for true crime. So in terms of me having absolutely no idea what I wanted to do, but rather I was just interested in the subject field, which is also a completely normal experience. So whether or not that started with true crime, I thought about, well, I kind of enjoy law, but I'm a bit not, I don't want to say lazy, but I don't necessarily enjoy some aspects of it. They may be not quite what I'm looking for. I then realized that I was quite critical of everything, which is a good trait to have as a criminologist. But essentially, I thought maybe criminology and psychology is where I want to be. So I did criminology and psychology in my undergraduate degree. I was a first in family university student from a Maori background. So it was very uncommon for anyone to, you know, go through this process. And my grandmother would always ask me if I was in CSI, and those types of questions were not uncommon in the household. But one of the kind of key things is I did my first class in psychology and I hated it. It was so much science, reading, textbook and application. It just wasn't for me. I finished it, but it really wasn't there. I essentially finished that bachelor's degree still having no idea what career paths I kind of wanted to take. So that essentially led me to do a lot of traveling and to come back and think, well, I really enjoyed one particular unit, which is much like crime across borders. Maybe I'll come back and do an honours degree. And essentially, I've never left from there. So while I did that study at Deakin University, I taught my first class when I was 22. Yeah, I taught my first class when I was 22 in the field of criminology. And essentially, it became my life love in terms of delivering amazing content in areas of criminology that are developing and pursuing a PhD in that particular area. In doing that particular journey, though, there are lots of other places you can go. So while I specifically work in the College of Law and Justice, delivering lectures, making new units, there are also other key areas. For instance, we generally have a joke about cops, courts, and corrections is where, you know, the main three areas that we might go into. But there are things outside of that. So one of the key things I see as career opportunities now for anyone that's interested in criminology or people who may be doing law but aren't sure if they want to practice, there is such a huge demand now for graduate programs. One of the key things is it used to be such a struggle, you know, to get interviews, you go through assessment centres. But what we're finding now is that the demand from employers to have students work in these graduate programs is increasingly high, that they're actually going back and looking at applicants that were initially rejected due to psychometric testing. So that kind of key demand and areas you might expand in, it could be things like environmental crime, working at places like the taxation office. You might also want to work for places like intelligence or Department of Defense, but there's a really high demand for, you know, lots of other areas that aren't just academia, like me, who just decided I never want to leave university and I love this environment. So that's some of the kind of key things you can think about. If you're unsure where you want to go, you know, my biggest thing in terms of achieving your future goals and tips is apply for everything is my biggest advice. You never know what you're going to enjoy or dislike, and, you know, keeping your options open, you never know where you're going to end up, which could be like us here in academia or in other places. And yeah, that's a little bit about my journey. Thanks, May.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for your inspiring stories. But what we are now at Q&As. So I'm going to hand it over to all our participants, should you have any questions. But I will pass it on to my President's Officer, Marcella, who will take us through this part of the session.
Thank you, May, and thank you, panelists. If I could ask you all to provide your top tips on how to succeed. And I'm happy for any of you to jump in first. There's no particular order.
I'm happy to go first, and I have a few tips. And in terms of block teaching, the thing to the first thing to observe about block teaching is only VU does it. So it's a very unique way in which to learn a law degree, for example. But it does fit within a broader range in terms of intensive teaching is done at a lot of universities, and it's been done for a long time. Intensive teaching has usually been done as an optional um, way of delivering units, particularly for, between semesters, or if you're doing an intensive unit over summer or over winter. But VU is the first university to do it as the only way of delivering a course. So it's a compressed or an intensive form of teaching. And this means that there's less time to do everything compared to the traditional semester. So my first tip is to do with time management, and I'm pretty sure that the other speakers will talk about time management as well. So the units that I teach, they both have a research assignment as part of the assessment, and in block model, there's less time to do the research assignment. So you typically have about 2 weeks from the start of a block to when the research assignment is due. And in the past, you would have had 7 to 9 weeks to do the research assignment. So it compresses the time down, and it means that you need to be really well organised in terms of your planning. And there's also no SWOT vac in blocks. So your exam is often the day after your final class. And you may have pages and pages of complex reading to do to prepare for classes, as well as doing assessment at the same time. So my first tip is to make a note of due dates and plan your time backwards from those due dates. And the second part of that is plan to submit your work early. Remember Murphy's Law, that if something is going to go wrong, it will go wrong at the worst possible time. So plan for those hiccups to happen and plan to submit your work early. And that's my first tip. The second tip is about attending classes. So block teaching is very much based on students actually being there physically in the class. It's not a correspondence course. It's very much based on the learning which happens in the classroom. And in block model, you typically have 3 classes per week, which last for 3 hours each. There's no part-time option in block model, unfortunately. Each unit is a full-time study load. And it is important that you as students attend as many classes as possible. Classes is where the important concepts and the principles are discussed and debated and clarified. It's also where you can ask questions. That's questions of the teacher, but also asking questions of other students in the class. It's also where instructions are clarified in terms of, from a teaching perspective, it sometimes only becomes apparent that the instructions are not as clear as they could be when we get feedback from students. And so classroom is where the instructions are clarified and what you need to do becomes hopefully clearer. If you miss a class, then you miss a lot. You miss all those things that I just mentioned. So attending classes dramatically increases your prospects of doing well in a unit. Moving to my third point, you need to be aware of the opportunity to request extensions and also to request special consideration. So extensions of due dates is available to everyone. It's if you become sick or if something comes up during the block, like a work commitment or a family commitment, then you are able to apply for an extension. Separate to that is a special consideration process. If you need to move an exam date, for example, or if you need to request an extension that's longer than 2 days, then you need to go through the special consideration process. And please, when you use the special consideration process, please provide evidence or supporting documents to support your request. Because if you don't provide that supporting documents, then we need to go back to you to get those documents, or else your request can't be processed. My fourth point is to do with access plans. Many students don't know about access plans, but they should and they need to. So an access plan is a document that's drawn up by the university which sets out any accommodations which that student needs to complete their study. And these accommodations may be different for each student, and they may include things like extra time to complete the exam, or they may include automatic extensions of due dates for written work. So an access plan is about accommodating the student's circumstance, because the university has a duty to take certain circumstances into account in relation to particular students. So an access plan is not about giving special treatment to a student, it's about accommodating their actual circumstances. And I guess at the same time, I want to remind students that VU has a counselling service, and that's a service which is available to all students. If you are experiencing distress or personal issues, it's a good idea to contact the counselling service for free confidential advice to support you through those difficulties. The fifth point is about exams. So most units still include an exam, and the 2 units that I teach both include an exam. There's no SWOT vac in block teaching, so there's no week or weeks of preparation for exams. You have to begin preparing for the exam from the very first day of the unit. So if your unit has an exam, you need to start preparing summaries after the first class, and you need to prepare your summaries after each class that you do. You can't afford to leave it to the day before the exam. You need to prepare for the exam as you go through the unit. And the second point I want to make there is make sure that when you're answering exam questions, that you're actually answering the exam questions and you're not copying from your notes, you're not making general statements or giving sort of general overviews of topic areas. You need to make sure that you're really focusing on the question and you're responding to the question that's on the page in front of you. Because if you're copying your notes, then you definitely won't be answering the question. The final point that I want to make is about census date. So census date is it's like a parachute. It's the Monday of the second week of each block. It's the last day that you can withdraw from the block without paying fees for that unit. And if you've missed classes in the first week, or if you know that you're going to have lots of other commitments outside of study during the block, it's a good idea to think seriously about withdrawing from the unit, but you have to do it by the census date. And the census date comes around quite early. And that's something which I recommend that you put in your diary, that the census date is always the Monday of the second week of the block. And the final point is that the VU calendar actually includes 10 blocks each year. So you can complete a full-time study load, even if you don't enroll in every single block. So you can take 2 blocks off, for example, and still complete a full study load over the course of the year. So it may be a good option if you have other commitments going on, if you've got extensive work or family commitments, to simply take a block off, because there's no part-time option, as I mentioned, but you do have the option always of taking a block off. You don't always have to do blocks back to back to back, because it can be pretty exhausting. So allow yourself to take time off study if you need to, and this supports your mental health, which is really crucial to your well-being overall. So those are my 6 tips about success in a block.
Thank you.
I might go next. Bill's stolen some of my thunder. They were all excellent tips. And so I guess what Bill was saying before about that in block mode, there isn't technically a... Sorry, I just want to mute yourself, please. I think you might be able to make up. Thank you. So Bill was talking about before that, in block model, there isn't an option to study part-time as in during that particular block. But it's important that if you've worked out with your employer that there are certain periods that are going to be busier for you at work, that you plan your year as to which blocks you want to take off and work out your study, or even look in advance at the timetable over a year to see when the offerings are and the timing of the classes. So, if you've got intentions of doing evening classes, each subject's not going to have an evening class every single block. So you really need to sort of forecast the whole year and plan your study according to that. Another point that Bill was making when he was talking about time management was about working on your assignments. And in traditional mode, you did have longer to work on your written assessments, and yes, a shorter time in block model. But I guess the difference for us in our block model is we're only focusing on one unit. And in a way, this block model of study, because we are focusing on one unit at a time, and there shouldn't be any other assessments that are due besides your own personal commitments or employment commitments, we've taken some of the stress out of that by delivering in this model. But there is still a need for time management, because we don't only just study, we have other things happening in our lives. And that skill you're going to apply in the workplace. There are going to be times where you have deadlines that you need to manage. You might have court appearances. You might get a client, if you work in family law, like what I did, you might get a client that walks in at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and it's an urgent court application you need to file tomorrow morning. So there are going to be times when you have to work intensively as well. So those skills, we're preparing you for real life experience and managing your time to do that. So flowing on from time management, we've talked about managing deadlines for your assessments, and Bill's also talked about the importance of coming to class. But what comes from that too is being organised. So I think what's a really good tip is you all get access to VU Collaborate 1 week before we start our delivery. So what you should be doing is looking at that unit space, making sure you've got your book, have a look at what the first class readings are and do that. Just by doing those 2 little things, you're already starting ahead of the schedule, because it's very easy to fall behind in your readings, regardless of if you're in block model or if you do traditional mode like what I did. Whenever you've got assessments, everything, it's easy to fall behind. So just being really organised. Another tip, which I used to do when I was studying and I recommend, is you create yourself a little timetable, slot in where your classes are, where you want to work, things that are important to you, and see where are your free times where you're going to complete your readings, when you're going to work on your assessments, and just really plan out what your week's going to be like. Because it's important to have breaks, and you've got your own family commitments and personal commitments that you are important to you and you don't want to lose sight of as well, because this is a long degree and it's part of your life. So you want to do something sustainable as well. I had a note about using support services, and Bill has given such a lovely summary of the different support services available to you. So keep all of those in mind. The one that I will add to is to the library, the VU Law Library. They offer classes on research and referencing, but also one-on-one service. If you're finding it hard to research or find journals on a particular topic, they will help you. So they're just so friendly and lovely. They want to see you succeed. So take advantage of that service. The other is the VU Learning Hub. So in the VU Learning Hub, they've got a few different services. One of them is there's a 24-hour tutorial service, and each student gets 4 hours per semester of this free online service. So I've had students use it. And the way that they've used it is they've submitted drafts of their assignment and got feedback. And from what I've been told, it's very fast, within 24 hours or less, and really helpful bubble comments on assessments. So that's a really great tool, and it's free. Why wouldn't you use that? The second one is the drop-in service through the Learning Hub. So they're successful, so in the law and justice space, they're successful law students, and if you go onto their website, it will tell you the days and the times. It varies block to block, but you can go in again with your drafts and you can bounce off your ideas and your drafts to these successful law students and get tips. So as academics, we can't give you that advice on your drafts, but you're able to work in that kind of environment and get some feedback, which is really helpful. One of our role as an academic is to support you for your learning. So we can clarify questions about the unit, your assessment, but we can also direct you to these services, and that's part of our role because we want to see you succeed. And we can only help or advise you if you communicate with us. So do take advantage of that special relationship you have with your lecturers, because we have small class sizes as well. And because we see you 3 times a week, there's an opportunity to develop a good relationship with your academic and your peers. Oh, and I remembered one more support service actually, which is Dictum's peer-to-peer mentoring program as well. So like Bill mentioned about 4 different services, I've just mentioned another 3. You can see how there's just so much support for our VU students. And I'm part of the first year college. We have a whole college dedicated to our first year students and transitioning. So that's how much we prioritise students and succeeding at VU. And I know I sound like a big advertisement, but I'm really passionate, and it's so true. Like when I was studying, I don't remember all this kind of support that was available to me at my fingertips. So this is a really great university that prides our students. And I think that's evident in the new City Tower, which has a whole level for our students on level 10. But anyway, and the last thing I'll add to the tips is to reflect. Each block, I think you should take a moment and reflect on what went well in the block and what didn't go so well. And what didn't go well, how can I, or what should I do to improve? So for instance, if this block, my referencing wasn't very good, then I'm going to go to the law library and I'm going to go to the referencing workshop. So just have a really clear plan so that you can improve as you progress through your degree. I think I've done enough talking, so I'll stop there and I'll hand it over to maybe Taylor or Shireen.
Thank you.
Sorry, Taylor, did you want to go first or?
Oh, you go through. We'll keep it in order if you want. If not, I'm happy to go. Yeah, I don't mind.
No worries. Look, I'll just be quick because my points really are reiterating Dr. Bill and Kathleen's wonderful tips. I think it gives a really good overview of the support services and the tips of how to approach the subjects. How I would like to some additional tips that I'd like to provide is just in regards to some other things to think about when you're attending these subjects. I can't reiterate enough about attending classes. And I know it's so difficult sometimes because students have quite a lot of commitments that they have to attend to, but just know that the teachers want to teach you a lot of practical tips that can't be conveyed through the material that you get. And it's all those practical tips that are really going to set you up when you are practicing as a lawyer. And I'll give you an example in migration. I will tell you a lot of the tips we give in class, the feedback the students give us say it really helps us condense what they've understood about how the law works sometimes, because migration is so prescriptive. We've got many tools such as the usual acts and regs, but we've also got instruments and policy and directions that we all have to interlink. And so it's those tips that you get in class that are really valuable for when you are practicing as a lawyer. I love the block model because it does also sometimes reflect, as what Kathleen said, skills that you need as a lawyer. Time management is key. You can never predict what's going to happen when you're practicing. And if you have a block, you can look at it as if it's a real life case and you have this intensive 4 weeks to get through it. And you can't, in a real life case, cram at the end. So it's time managing and how you're going to attend to that case. Look at it as a case every time you go to class. The other thing that I would like to say, just in regards to picking the units for the block model, I think we've all been students and we all know that we speak to each other and there's easy subjects and there's harder subjects and so forth. That is not the way to approach it. Look at these subjects as an opportunity to get a taste of what each area is. And it could be that one subject, you're not that interested in it, but I would also say don't close the door on that area of law, particularly if you're not sure what you want to do. The reason I say this is that sometimes the way it's conveyed in class, there is also a practical element to it, and you may like the practical element to it as well. So don't close the door on that. I'm going to be honest, if I had my time again doing my law studies, I wish I had picked the subjects I was interested in, not what my friends and my colleagues were saying were the easier one just to get through the course, because then I would have had a better idea of what I wanted to do. So that's probably my top tip. Pick subjects you're interested, or you may not be interested in because you'll probably find that's what you love to do. Other than that, I'm just going to reiterate the last point because I don't want to go over something that's already been said. Please attend the classes. You will see that it is so much easier when it comes to assessment and exam time. Thank you very much. Over to you, Taylor.
I created this very rushed infographic to help me follow along. So if you like, I'm happy to share it. It'll keep me on track as well. But essentially, Kathleen, Shireen, and Bill have covered 99% of these points, which are likely to now be redundant. But I feel like this is going to jazz me up a little bit. So in terms of some of my kind of key tips, the first thing is really about the more you do block model, the easier it gets. As someone who's taught across both traditional format and block model, holy hell, block model was terrifying at first. That turnaround time, having those 3 days, and also forming the relationships you don't get to see. For instance, being in a traditional model, I could have about 370 students that I would see in just the one day. So not being able to really get to know what their experiences are or what their demands are, it just means that in doing block model, we have that first year college there to support you, like Kathleen said. And the idea is that it will get so much easier. So if you're in a place to be a mentor, or you're feeling that you might be anxious about what this process is like and you're not sure how to plan, there are so many amazing services that are dedicated just for you. Us as staff cannot use the mentoring service, although it would be great, but these services are really made to help you out. Another kind of key resource, which I think is really important in criminology as well as it will be in law, but in terms of criminology, because there's such a breadth of areas you can go into, whether that is working for the EPA, the ATO, ASIC. You might also go into more criminal side in terms of Department of Justice. VU Employ is essentially a hub that's specific to career searchers. So it looks at all forms of graduate programs, job and careers, and it's also got some pretty amazing tools that you can use, like Career Pulse, where you get an idea of, what might be my deficiencies in what the type of career I'm looking for. Resume 360 and Interview 360, they give you live feedback. It's a really embarrassing story, but I had a spelling error on my resume. Yes, Resume 360 found this and I was completely shamed by it, but it was a really amazing tool that I could demonstrate and show, well, this thing actually does work and it's there for you. They also have a Career Ready Award, which is like a point system where you do different activities to help you build your career over a 2-year span. You can actually include that on your resume at the end of your degree. So if you are interested in learning more about careers, or you're not quite sure on the career path you want to go on, I definitely recommend using VU Employ because it's a really incredible service. The next thing, which we've talked about a little bit before, the things about building relationships with each other between student and teacher. These are really unique things here at VU by doing block model, and please make use of it. Coming and speaking to us, having a chat, what are your interests, what are the things you want to do? But in order to kind of get that experience and the most of it, you do have to attend class. For those people who attend class and form these relationships with instructors and lecturers, it's a really great and beneficial process for you. For instance, I've recently been a reference for 2 graduates who have gone into case management and family violence, as well as another one that's now become an environmental policy officer. So looking at the kind of range and techniques you can get in building these relationships, we are there to help you and we do want you to succeed. So please do feel, if you want to reach out or talk to us, it's a really great part of that. I won't go into planning anymore because this has been really, really covered. And also as someone who procrastinates, it's always going to be a challenge. So planning is never easy. And if you are someone that procrastinates, maybe include that in your plans as well. Procrastination time is a normal thing to do. So don't be too hard on yourself when you are in that phase. And the last thing is really about read your feedback. One key thing we've noticed is that feedback isn't necessarily read all of the time. You might look at the grade, but not necessarily the feedback itself. We aren't giving you feedback to be punitive or to to be demeaning in any way. The idea is that your feedback is there to make you, take on some constructive feedback and apply that into your next assessment. Depending on the type of unit, we also plan the assessments so that they go in sequence with each other. What that means is that the feedback you get, you'll be able to use across multiple assessments and in other units. And that links us back into all those amazing resources you have if you notice that there is a frequent pattern happening in that feedback, like something like you're referencing. So those are my kind of key tips, but yeah, that is all from me.
Thank you very much. One of the things that we've now, given that we've sort of exiting from the COVID bubble we've all been in, is returning now back to face-to-face exams. Are there any tips that you might be able to provide to students now that most of them have experienced it, but now I find that it's nearly every core subject is now going back to face-to-face exams?
I guess one of the tips that I would just give for exams is making use of your reading time. I think that is the key. And then that almost brings you back to managing your time. So during your reading time is the time where you're reading the questions, you're planning your answers, and you're working out how you're going to divide your time amongst those questions. And usually before the exam, you're told how many questions, what each are worth by marks. So you can almost do some of that time planning before you go there. But I think when you read the question, what I used to do as a tactic was start off with the questions that were my strongest and answering those. So then I could have extra time for the ones that I felt were weaker. And I think in most law exams would have a practical aspect to a question. If not all units, a lot of law units do, where they have a hypothetical problem and you need to give advice. So I think you need to go back to that basic structure of how to structure your response as well. So I know we teach it in LSIC, but you might have done LSIC a long time ago and forgot those basic skills. But going back to that fundamental IRARC structure and doing that for each issue. And I know Bill's spoken about this before, that in a problem-based question, a common mistake by students is assuming or not spending much time in the application part. And that's where often a lot of the marks are earned. And I think you were touching on that, Bill, before when you were talking about if you're just copying from your notes during the exam, you're not going to succeed. So the notes are only going to help you in respect to when you're talking about what is the law, but the exam is going to assess you on identifying the issue and applying it. And so that IRARC model is so important because it's going to make sure that you stay on track and have a really structured response. So yeah, they're the two tips I've got for exams.
Thank you. Are there any tips that any of the panelists could offer in relation to the quantity of paperwork or stuff that needs to be actually at their fingertips on the exam? Should they limit it to trying to bring everything down to one double-sided A4 page and just bring forward a good plan? Or should they be walking in with every single textbook that they've ever been told to read? How much should they be coming into an exam with?
Well, my advice about exam hasn't really changed much, like a pre-block and now we're in block. Like, I think the best exam notes are usually quite brief, and I usually recommend to students having 1 page of notes for each topic that we cover. So if you've got 9 or 10 topics that are covered in a unit, then I think about 1 page per topic is about the right amount that you need. But it varies from student to student. Like, some students like, and perhaps they're reassured by having lots of notes, and that's fine as long as those notes are organized. Like, you can use indexing and things like that. And I've seen students who have like folders of notes, and that's fine as long as it's organized and you can find different parts of it quickly. But I do think that brief summaries are probably the best exam notes that you can have. Have more extended notes if you want to, but make sure you can easily navigate your way around them, because you know what it's like. The exam table is not big, and it's really not helpful to have folders and folders of notes and your textbook. And during the exam, you shouldn't need to refer to the textbook. You should have your own summaries that are already there in your notes. But I think briefer notes are better, and make sure that the important thing is that you express your exam response in your own words, that you're not copying from what a textbook says or what a judge has said. That the important thing is to put your response in your own words, and then you're actually showing that you actually understand the material, you understand the question, you understand the materials that you're talking about.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you. And Sharina and Taylor, is there anything more you could add about exams?
Just a couple of quick points. I think about the guide, I think as Dr. Bill has said, it depends on the student and what makes you feel comfortable. In regards to, I think some units are different. So in migration, because we've got the law extracted in our textbook, we encourage students to look at the textbook to find the answers. So just be aware of what's required for each subject. They're not all the same in the way they're presented. And the last thing I want to talk about is just being practical. We all know that notes get circulated between students. And I just want to encourage you to make your own notes, because it's the process of making your own notes is where you're going to actually learn the content. Because if you can summarize a point, it means you understand it. If you're reading someone else's notes, you're just passively learning, and that's not going to get you anywhere really. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. And Taylor, do you have anything to add?
I'm going to throw a spanner in the works. We do not have exams in criminology, but on my days of having to do some law core units and doing exams, I definitely agree with Bill in terms of always having the textbook there as a backup, because there will be moments when you second guess yourself and be like, oh, actually, did I write that correctly? Did I summarize it right? So I always prefer that method. But yeah, definitely having those concise notes in your own words, whether you use key quotes, summaries, or whatever suits you best. Yeah, I think that's a really good way going into block model as well. If we think about block model in itself, you only have a short amount of time to really prepare. Even though you might want to prepare for your exam over 4 weeks, we know that sometimes time does get the best of us. So having them nice and concise is a really good way, I believe, as well.
No, it's fantastic. I've got a question that's come through. How do students go about getting feedback on their exams, especially as you know, is it something that is offered, or is that just not sort of used at VU?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And in my experience, very few students actually do request feedback on their exam, but every student is entitled to get feedback on their exam. And sometimes it's the students who do really well who actually ask for feedback. But interestingly, it's the students who fail or who don't do well are the ones who really need the feedback. And perhaps many students are not aware that they can get feedback, and academics are happy to provide the feedback. And it's, yeah, perhaps most necessary for the students who don't do well. And I've had a student in the past who, when supplementary exams were still available, where a student who failed the first exam got feedback and took that feedback on board, was able to do really well in the supplementary exam. Now, we don't have supplementary exams anymore, but it does show like that getting feedback can make a real difference, because sometimes students who do poorly in exams, it's not that they don't know the material, but they don't know how to respond to exam questions. And sometimes it's to do with their exam technique. It's not their knowledge per se. It's actually to do with what they do in their responses. They sort of approach the questions in a way that's not what's expected of them. So there's the knowledge part of, yeah, what's necessary to do well, but there's also the exam technique part. And an interesting point is that in the block model in its pure sense is not meant to involve exams. So, you know, block exams are meant to sort of disappear, but of course, to do with accreditation of the law course and other courses, exams have been retained, but they are a real pressure point because you're moving straight from one exam to the next unit, and it is difficult to get feedback. But every student is entitled to get feedback, and I encourage every student to request that, whether they do well or not so well. It's always available. Like, I sometimes have students approach me, but it's rare in my experience.
Thank you. I'm going to open questions to the floor. If anybody has any questions they'd like to ask, you're welcome to. No?
I might ask a question.
Oh, yes. Thank you,
Yeah.
sir.
This is to everyone, all the panelists, and maybe some other people might have some opinions on it. What do you think are the key benefits of the block model over the traditional method of teaching? I've been fortunate enough to be able to do both in previous life as well. So I'd be keen to obviously find out what you guys think about that.
I can kick off the discussion. I would probably say being able to immerse yourself in the unit is one of the key things about block model that makes it unique and successful. So, you know, when I did my law degree, I was studying 4 units at one time, And it could be confusing learning different concepts. So like, for instance, learning contract law and torts that are 2 different units, and also managing the different deadlines of assessment. So in block model, one of the key advantages is being able to immerse yourself in that particular subject matter and just really focus on that and understand it before moving on to the next topic or next unit of study, and not having to juggle multiple due dates of different assessment tasks at once.
Yeah, and I think there's another key benefit, and it's been, I mean, Kathleen mentioned it, as did Shireen and Taylor. It's to do with the relationship which develops during the course of the block, because the classes in block model they're not only longer, but they're more frequent than they are under a semester model. So you have 3 classes per week of 3 hours long, and um, it naturally supports the students getting to know the teachers and the teachers actually getting to know the students. And that is particularly important for students who may be struggling, that the students can ask for particular types of support and the teacher can recognise what types of support are actually needed. And I think that relationship building part of the block teaching, I think, is really crucial. And it's particularly advantageous to students who might be having difficulties. And it reinforces the point which I think all of us have made about attendance, that the students who attend classes get the most out of it. And we might be speaking to the converted here, but attendance is such an important part of block teaching and how it works, because those relationships develop best of all in the face-to-face environment, where you actually get to see students work and you get to give feedback on students. And it's a regular process of feedback where it's like a loop, where students can get feedback on the early assessment and hopefully they can build that feedback into their later assessment in that unit and also in subsequent units. So I think the relationship part of it is really a strong point.
Oh, sorry, no, Shireen, go for it.
Oh no, I just had one quick comment. I think for the benefits for the student, we actually can cover more content in a way, because we're not spending in the traditional model refreshing what we did last week. We're just continuing our story from the day before. So I think we can delve into topics a little bit more in depth than the traditional model. That's it from me. Thanks.
I was going to say, as a last point, like Bill said about this idea of forming relationships and attendance, it really is the biggest benefit to you. We obviously feel very satisfied when we make relationships and we can encourage you and get to know you more, but we also want to celebrate your wins in that experience. So whenever you have a win or a success or you've improved your mark, we actually do feel really happy, not only for you but also that we've been a part of your journey and your experience. So making the most of those relationships and coming in class is really great, but also block model accounts for knowing that you're time poor. We were all once university students that had 1 or 2 multiple part-time jobs. Sometimes in traditional mode, you may have, 5 days a week, 2 lectures one day, a seminar the next day, a day break, and something else. So this idea of having that consistency of 3 days, that's all you essentially have to dedicate. It may seem really intense and overwhelming at times, but that structured system actually gives us a lot of flexibility for you to have your own work and family goals, because we know you exist outside of the classroom and you do have other lives. So yeah, use that to your benefit as well in that planning phase. I can't stop saying planning, but yes. Planning.
Thanks for your responses, everyone.
Yeah, it was interesting when I first looked at VU and I saw the block model, I got really excited. But initially I thought it was just a first year block model. And then I kept dreading going into second year and then third and thinking, oh, I'm going to lose that block model. And I was really excited when it just flowed. And so the whole teaching of mine has been, the whole degree has been block model. So I don't know if that's because of COVID or if it's something that the university will always offer the full degree in block mode. I don't know if that's something Kathleen might be able to answer.
Yes, it's definitely, block model's here to stay. It's a VU block model. And yep, it's here to stay.
That's good to know. Any other further questions?
Simon's got his hand up.
Thank you, Simon.
I like to talk, as Kathleen probably remembers.
In a
from
good
our sit.
way.
Oh, okay, that's good. I guess I just have a comment and perhaps a question, but as a mature age student who's finishing up his first year, I've actually really enjoyed the block model and got a lot out of it. Someone who's also a bit time poor, I think it forces you to be really good with your time and start planning the assessments early. So I sort of figured between work and study, I have no choice other than to to start planning. So otherwise, I am a bit of a procrastinator. So I have enjoyed the block model. But I guess the question was, did anyone, when they were studying, have an idea of or a dream of going into research as they were studying, or is that something that sort of come along later? Because I sort of find that the more I go into this degree, the sort of angrier I get with studying law. It makes me want to perhaps dive off somewhere and do something a little bit deeper. But that's my question.
I might just say firstly that it's normal to have those feelings because studying law is a marathon. I remember when I was in my first year, I sort of was hit the ground running, but I do remember feeling in the second and third year almost like I didn't know if I would be able to complete the degree, and started to question even if this was something that I wanted to do. But I did like push through, and one of the benefits, I guess, or what helped me through that time was other law students and those friendships, because they, even though I had other friends studying in other courses, the fellow law students understood the pressures of studying law and, you know, writing a 3,000 word assignment and what that was like. So I guess that goes to what we were talking about building relationships and supporting each other through this journey of law. And I think the other aspect, which we've spoken about this evening, is, and I think it was you, Shireen, that was talking about sometimes the theory isn't necessarily what it's going to be like in the practical aspect. And you might like the theory, but not like the practical aspect, or vice versa. So it's about sort of like hanging in there and supporting each other and working through. Maybe you might want to add a bit more to that, Shireen.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. I can't stress enough about the theory and the practical aspect, because I'll be honest with you, Simon, the subjects I really disliked at law school, I absolutely love in practice. And it's one of those things where you just have to keep your mind open. And if you get an opportunity to be exposed to any type of law, to take that opportunity, because yes, it can be very different, theory and practice. I'll give you an example, admin law. Admin law, look, wasn't my favourite subject, but it's absolutely one of my favourite subjects, and I don't realise how important it is until you see it in practice. So I'm going to be honest with you, Simon, I had those feelings as well. And as Kathleen said, you have to acknowledge it and look, sometimes in day-to-day practice, I sometimes question why I'm doing the law. But when you look at the outcomes and what you're going to achieve, that will help you persevere through it. So with any job, there's the good side and the bad side, but you know, law can open so many opportunities for you.
Yeah, I feel like it's making me angry in a good way. Like I sort of see a lot of weird injustices in the law, and I'm like, well, how is this possible? I guess it comes from, you know, an evolution of centuries of, you know, common law, and I just think that's so crazy. So I think that's sort of spurring me to go down the research route maybe later on.
Simon, I just want to say, as the pessimistic criminologist who not only hates the law, the state, and all things above it, being critical of those processes is actually what pushed me into research. So in terms of, did I know in my first year, second year, third year, I wanted to do this? No, but I found out that Guantanamo Bay was essentially kidnapping people from overseas, bringing them there, torturing them, and not allowing them access to due process. So that one case and that one example essentially changed my life. And I said, holy shit, this thing is happening. I think I could dedicate my life to these kind of areas of poking fun at law, but also understanding things like injustice happen. So yes, absolutely, there is the other side where, you know, practice is likely to be very different from a criminology perspective. You know, it could be different when you're working in criminal justice. But as someone who, I think Bill is very much the same as well, we're very critical of such law processes. I think that's where research really thrives. So yeah, a lot of the best honors law theses that I have marked, it's those critical, you know, components that really make a good thesis. So it's never a problem to want to go into research either.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
I was confused when we were doing contracts, and I was like, why is the age of consent for criminal responsibility, is it 10, I think, or 11? And why is to be able to enter a contract 18? Like, why is that different? Where has that come from?
Do you do a double degree, Simon? Because you absolutely should do criminology. If you're having any of these thoughts, I highly recommend a double degree for you. Yeah.
I did crim in an undergrad degree, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Perfect. Yeah. But yeah, it sounds like you are interested in that critical side. But I think there are also aspects of the law that look at that more critical side. Like I know Bill works specifically in human rights law. Same thing with migration law. There's lots of changes in those areas as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's good, Simon, like you've recognised the connection between, yeah, the theory, the learning part, and the practice. And certainly, when I worked for 10 years as a lawyer in a well, I worked to the tenants union as my final job before I started at Vic Uni, and my interest in law reform was one of the big motivations for me to actually go back and do further study. And it is. Um, Undergraduate degree can be boring because you have to do a whole lot of subjects and you actually get more choice as you progress. And certainly if you do an honours dissertation, you get choice over the topic which you choose. You've got open slather in terms of the choice. And as as you study more, you actually have um, more choice. And that's it can be frightening, but it's a good thing as well that you have more choice over the topic that you choose and the way that you approach that topic, because there's so many ways of doing legal analysis. And we can't hope to cover that in an undergrad degree, but you do actually get exposed to that if you do further study. But yeah, I mean, there's great opportunities for doing further study, whether it's in criminology or whether it's in human rights law. And I certainly try to bring that into the units that I teach about critical analysis, because we know the law itself will change. Like that's the inevitable thing; it will change. And you may have some particular ideas about reform, and that's something which you can explore through an honours dissertation, but you can explore more fully through a master's program or through a PhD. So there's all sorts of opportunities for reform, and they can be pursued. I mean, I'm also a member of the Law Institute, and I'm on the Human Rights Committee at the Law Institute. So I'm in contact with lawyers who are still working in the human rights area, and it's really good to hear about the issues which they're experiencing on the ground. And hopefully I can actually bring that into my research as well. I hope that my research is not removed from the reality of legal practice and the reality of legal problems that people are facing.
Excellent. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? I'm just going to check, see if any other hands up. No. If that's all, I'm just going to pass you back to May. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcella. So before we do end today's session, I would like to pass it back to our speakers. If you have any final advice or final words for our students, now's your chance.
Okay, I'll just say briefly, one of the networks that I'm involved in is called the Wellness for Law Network, and it's a network of lawyers, legal academics, and law students who are focused on the area about wellness in law. And I think wellness is the key issue in legal education at the moment. And I'm researching at the moment about the relationship between block teaching, like intensive teaching, and wellness. And I think there's ways in which block teaching promotes wellness. We talked about relationship building and things like that before, but there's also about the timelines and the really pressing timelines that students experience in block teaching. And I encourage everyone to find out about the Wellness for Law Network. I think it's a really important area. It involves legal academics, but also lawyers can become a member of that network as well. There's an annual conference they publish in that area, and there's been a bit published about wellness and and intensive modes of teaching. But it really underlines, I think, all the points that we've made today about the importance of good time management, that if you can get those skills down, then you can manage the pressures of block teaching and those quite pressing timelines which you have during each block unit that you do. And, being able to manage your emotions and also recognize when you need help, when you need to take time off, and know there's a counselling service and other support services to support you. So I definitely encourage everyone to join the Wellness for Law Network. I'll drop the web address into the chat, but that's my final parting words.
Kathleen, Taylor, Shireen?
I was just going to say, I don't think, Simon, we've met in person, have we yet? It's only been online. Yeah, thought so. But I was just going to say, if you see me around campus, please come up, say hello, even if you don't need any more tips or advice, but just say hello. And, take advantage of the academics that are there to help you. We love talking. We wouldn't be in this profession if we didn't. So yeah, please do. We're more than happy to answer any questions, or if you think of something after the session and you want to send us an email, please do so. Yeah, we're always here to help.
I've just got one final point, and it's just to get involved. So as my fellow panelists have explained, there's so many services, but there's so many opportunities. And the more you get involved, I've always said this, the more you're going to get out of it. I know it can be scary at the start to get involved and take that step to even network with your fellow students or speak to them or get involved in any clubs or the Dictum Society. But the more you get involved really in any aspect of life, the more you're going to get out of it. So that's my sort of final tip.
I don't think I have a very good tip to end this with, but essentially, it's okay to not know what you want to do. You might currently just be going through the paces. Block model is so fast paced that you haven't really taken time, to think about what you want to do in the future. But know that when you are ready, all of us here as your lecturers and academics and professional staff and all the services, we are all here to see you succeed. So if ever you have a question or you're having doubt about what you want to do in the future, there are so many other opportunities besides what we maybe talk about in class. And services you can use. So, don't be afraid to try new things or to think differently about where you want to go in the future too. Because yeah, like we said before, Simon, did I have any idea I wanted to do research? Absolutely not. But things change. So it's important to recognize that as well. Is sometimes you have the aha moment, but other times it's just about trying new things and putting your hand up, which is a good thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So that brings us to the end of today, and we thank you all for joining us online. Please join me in thanking our amazing panelists, Phil, Kathleen, Shireen and Taylor, for giving up their valuable time today to share with us their expertise and to further our understanding and education around the processes of how to succeed in the block. We have now come to photo op. So before we do say farewell, if we can all smile for a photo, which I will now take. So please ensure that your camera is turned on if you would like to participate. Okay, so I'll count us down. So in 3, 2, 1, smile. Awesome. Thank you once again, everyone, and please stay safe and healthy. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Everyone, have a great night.